What's going on, everyone? We are back with, well, another Set 6 leader tier list. Ooh, but this time we get to talk about pre-release. So it is coming up pretty quickly as of recording this video. Generally, the first couple of pre-releases are going to be happening either the weekend here or the next weekend. And so we're going to be ranking all these leaders for your pre-release and what you could be expecting. I will have a full video out on a pre-release guide here shortly, like I do with every set, where you get to see me actually build a deck for sealed. My absolute, or one of my absolute favorite formats. Draft is really my favorite. That said, we've already gone over the tier list for Premier. This list, expect it to be quite different. Generally, the things that are valuable in limited don't generally translate over to Premier all that well. So I'm sure this will be a big shakeup from what you were seeing in the previous video. That said, a huge thank you to my patrons, guys. We are getting ready to try to do our own little pre-release in the Patreon, which is going to be an absolute blast. So check it out down below if you would like. And let's talk about the tiers real quick for our sealed games. For those of you that don't know, real quick description of the pre-release, if you're new to it, or maybe you who don't really do it all that often, you have to build a 30 card deck. You are given typically, and I believe this is still the case, the guaranteed leaders from the set reveal. So in this case, it'd be Chancellor Palpatine and Padme. They're just given to you in your pre-release kit. In the previous sets, it was whatever leader was revealed. You open up 6 packs, you get 6 leaders from those, and then of course you get a bunch of cards. So you have to build a deck out of those 30 cards. That said, the S tier leaders, these are going to be leaders that you generally will just play, even if there are not a lot of cards matching their aspects, because the power level of these cards is so incredible that it is worth putting them in your deck as your leader, because their ability or their flip is so strong, they themselves are worth going into that aspect. A tier leaders are going to be leaders that have a really, really powerful effect, or like I said, a good flip. So a good stat line or something to really add to the board, but they're not something that's going to be like, okay, I only have 2 cards in this pool, I'm going for them because they're an absolute bomb, or someone that can just win the game outright. But they provide enough value to where if you have even just a little bit of cards in this card pool, you're going to want to run this leader. B tier leaders, these are going to be ones that are just kind of role fillers. They're going to be solid. They're not going to really do anything too crazy, but they will fit in. And really, if you have a bunch of really awesome legendaries or rares that you happen to open, and well, I got a leader that kind of fits that aspect, great, they're solid, I'm going to go ahead and pull them out and play them as my B tier options. C tiers, these are really leaders that you're kind of hitting the bottom of the barrel in terms of, they're still decent enough to play, and oftentimes they will add to your game, but generally you only play them if you really have a very strong card pool to back them up. They're not ones that are going to really change the course of the game on their own, and they're not going to add a whole lot to your game plan. And then D tier leaders, these are the ones where I would be hard pressed to see them do a whole lot at all. These are the ones that either like they're understated or their ability just doesn't really do all that much in limited and is not something that you really want to take advantage of. These are ones that I would generally steer clear of, and there are a couple in this list. That said, I'm excited to dive into the rankings today, and let's start off with our Vigilance leaders. Starting us off, we've got Chancellor Palpatine. This guy here is going to be one of your, presumably, starting leaders in your pre-release kit, and he's kind of interesting. So in Premier, you're really searching a larger deck for his ability. We have those 1-cost action to search the top 5 cards for a plot card. In draft, you're going to be able to get a lot more plot cards that are a little bit more valuable. So not only is frontside action going to be searching through a larger portion of the deck, right? 5 of 30 cards is a significant portion. I mean, we are talking like almost 20% of the entire deck, right? It is incredible. And so you're going to be able to find a lot of your plot cards very quickly. You'll probably have enough to be able to make this ability just 1 resource to draw a card, which isn't that crazy and limited, but it is a nice little value piece. The really big thing that I'm interested in for Palpatine is his 7 to deploy 5/8 stat line, or rather 6/8 stat line, I should say, and the ability to make your plot cards a lot cheaper. Generally, as we've seen, these draft formats and these limited formats, the sealed formats are a little bit slower than draft. And then the draft formats tend to be really, really fast as of the last couple of sets. So it can be difficult to get to 7 resources. In sealed, it's going to be a little bit easier. And when you do, you are going to get a big payoff. A 6-8 leader is a lot of stats for 7. And you also get this ability to really overwhelm the board to return when you deploy them in one action for the most part, because you get to play a card using plot, make it discount, maybe play a second card using plot. And there are going to be a lot of common and uncommon plot cards that aren't going to be like incredible, but they're going to be nice ones to resource, use the cards in your hand as you're going through, and then flip your leader, get a big board or whatever it is that you have with plot to be able to play. I see Chancellor Palpatine, nothing too incredible, but it's like a solid B, like a mid to low B tier for me. This guy, it's just going to be a big stat line. It's going to give you a little bit of value. It might draw you a couple of cards, maybe search for some specific plot cards that are really, really good. And it's just going to kind of do its job. There's nothing too crazy with Palpatine, not super like amazing or anything. It's not going to help you win the game in most cases, but it's going to be a leader that you're going to be perfectly fine kind of fulfilling as a role filler. Next up, we've got Jabba the Hutt. This guy, we've got a 1-cost action to make a friendly damaged unit deal 1 damage to an enemy unit. And, well, if it's got more than 3 or more damage, it deals 2. Then we have a 2/8/5 to deploy leader that, well, anytime another unit goes into combat and lives, you're going to be able to deal that much damage to another unit. So first things first, the front side action is a little bit awkward. There are a lot of situations where you will go ahead and get in value trades. It's part of the main kind of mechanics with limited formats or sealed formats is you are trying to play cards that generally are a little bit more powerful than your opponent. And so you get to kill theirs while keeping your unit. So you will probably end up with a lot of damaged units to be able to utilize Jabba's action. There are also a bunch of commons and uncommons that deal self-damage to them. So you will be able to get advantage out of those from Jabba. And then the flip side is really where Jabba's value comes in. The first thing I don't like about him is 2/8. 2/8's pretty weak. So your opponent can just attack Jabba and eventually kill him, and then his main value goes away. That said, you could get a lot of value out of Jabba if you have like the setup for a bunch of Sentinels. One of the biggest things in Limited is Sentinels can be really disruptive. And in Jabba specifically, if you have a Sentinel that has like 7 or 8 toughness, which is not unreasonable, right? There are even some plot cards that you could play out if you stall on Jabba's deploy so that they have Sentinel. And they live and they get in combat, they're just going to be knocking out like all of your opponent's units with Jabba's ability. So I could see this being like a solid A tier. The payoff on the flip side, if you kind of get the right options, can be really, really good. Even if you don't have Sentinels to kind of block some of the damage coming in, even if you just have high toughness units and attack into your opponent's units, usually that interaction will probably be giving you the option to kill off their units. And that can be really powerful. Take, for example, if you just have like a 3/4, for example, and your opponent has a 6 toughness leader, well, if it's a 3/6, which there are a couple leaders, you can attack and just kill their leader straight out. Or if you have like let's say a 5 toughness leader, like a 3/5, and they're playing a 4/6, right? Suddenly, your 3/5 kills their leader in one action with Jabba's flip. So there are a lot of really powerful things you can do with this, but I do think it's going to take a little bit more. I think if this was draft, I think you could bump this up, but I think it's sealed. I'm going to drop it down to like a mid to low A tier option. Lama Su is the next one up. This one is going to be all about those upgrades. You get to play some upgrades, make it cost 1 less. And, then eventually you can deploy your leader as a 3/7 for 6. And then when you complete attacks, you can return those upgrades from your discard pile to your battlefield and make it cost 1 less. Honestly, I'm a big fan of upgrades in Limited. Generally, they're really obnoxious to deal with, especially if you're placing them on leaders. Now, this format does not have a ton of removal in it. One of the biggest ones was like set 2 when you had like a million different forms to remove units. Daring Raid, Rival's Fault, Fell the Dragon, all in the same draft format. Even Vanquish, I think, was in that format as well. But there isn't a whole lot of ways to deal with upgraded units. So I think upgrades are going to be decently strong. So that's a nice plus to Lama Su. The only issue with that is there's not a ton of upgrades in the format. So you're going to have to get the right combination of cards to be able to make Lama Su's ability actually useful. I think the strongest thing about Lama Su is putting down your upgrades early, letting them fall to the discard pile, flipping Lama Su, and then just dumping every upgrade you have on your leader. Putting a bunch of upgrades on your leader is actually really strong. A perfect card for this, like Unveiled Knight, the 4-cost common upgrade +2/+3. If you get a bunch of those, perfect. You just flip Lama Su, get an immediately Unveiled Knight onto Lama Su, making him a 5/10. Attack, maybe get another Unveiled Knight from your discard pile, put it on Lama Su, it's a 7/13. Like that scales really, really quickly. So I do think that's decently strong. I think it's more of like a solid B tier option, more like a mid to high B tier, because it does require upgrades to do anything. Like Lamasu does not do anything if you don't have upgrades. And well, that can happen. If you open a sealed pool that's really, really mediocre, I do think the payoff is decent. But I don't think it's going to like necessarily win you the game in most cases. You're going to have a lot of upgrades. This is one that, you know, has varying degrees of power level. I think on average, it fits to the mid to high B tier. If you have like 4 to 5 upgrades or so in your deck, it can do that work, right? And even if it's out of aspect, that's even something you could still play. Like let's say it's Cunning villainy and you're playing Command Vigilance. You know, it's only going to cost 2 more or 1 more in Lamasu. Those could be worth it. So playing 4 to 5 upgrades, it's not unreasonable. I don't think this set's going to typically have 4 to 5 upgrades in your sealed pool, which is why it's more like mid B tier. I think this is a draft. I would be much more excited about this guy and maybe like a mid A tier or so. Next up, we've got Leia Organa. This one is quite interesting. We have a 1 cost action, disclose any aspect with the exception of villainy. And if you do, you can give an experience token to a unit that doesn't share an aspect with the revealed card. Now, on the flip side, we've got a 4/7 stat line that has the same action but on the attack. And remember, if you disclose, let's say, a command card, you can give the experience token to Leia herself. Very, very important that that's noticed. I think this card is excellent, to be honest. One of the biggest powerhouses of a leader in the previous draft formats, before it was like pilots and all this stuff, we had Snoke be an absolute menace, right? Just giving experience tokens for 1 resource. We had the Rey in set 2, was an absolute destruction of a powerhouse. If you were able to load up a couple of cards like Sundari Peacekeeper during that meta and get a couple of experience token on these, you know, cheaper units that have the low power to fit with Rey's ability, it was amazing. That was the restriction over there, which was Rey's ability. In draft, you're going to have cards that are completely out of aspect, right? Like that just happened, or in sealed rather. You're going to have 2 to 3 cards that are completely out of aspect. So it's going to help you get the disclose properly, but you're also going to have a lot of cards that are just command or just vigilance or just cunning because you're playing with a lot of common cards. So getting a card that's able to match the kind of proper aspects that you need to give experience tokens isn't going to be as difficult, I imagine. And so for me, seeing as how powerful experience tokens have been, not only that, but you also get a 4/7 to deploy, I can see this absolutely trouncing a lot of leaders. I mean, if you just think about some of the options you have, if you could just like turn 1, play a unit, and then turn 2, put an experience token and kill their unit and keep your unit around, and then follow up with another unit, that's going to be a curve that most decks won't be able to deal with. And that's kind of what you're trying to do with Leia. And you're going to be able to do that every single turn. Not to mention, there are a lot of times where you have to play off curve in that you don't have that perfect curve where 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Leia helps you with that because you can utilize that 1 resource every single turn, no matter what, for the most part. So I think Leia is actually going to be one of the better sealed leaders. It's going to be one where, you know, you can, if you don't have a lot of cards in her aspect, that's okay because you can utilize a lot of cards from, you know, the other aspects and then have, you know, 5 or 6 cards, and you're likely to draw one of those cards alongside the ones that are out of the aspect, and then that's going to benefit really well. And the payoff is there for Leia. It is going to be a very, very solid one. Next up and last for the Vigilance, we've got Satine. So Satine is a Vigilance heroism. We've got an action to heal up 2 damage from a unit, and if you do, you deal that much damage to your base. And then we've got a 0/8 to deploy with Restore 4 on 5 resources. So first things first, the 0/8 is honestly not that good. It really depends on the format generally, but usually when you have a leader with 0 power, it's difficult to actually maintain that value trade that we really want to be doing in limited in most games. There are games where you can absolutely race and games where you can absolutely outvalue. In sealed, it's usually all about, you know, a couple of really powerful cards and then getting a few really good value trades along the curve with some of the good cards that you have. Now, Satine has 2 sides to it. The front side I actually think is really strong. Being able to heal up units. If you do get one of those really nice trades in where you kill a unit, your unit lives, you get to heal it up. That can be really, really useful. On the flip side, you get a 0/8. So I think there's some good things with her, and then there's some bad things. I think if you get some upgrades like Unveiled Might on her, she can be much, much better because 8 toughness is a lot to go through. To me, though, on my initial glance, I'm going to put her in the C tier category. This is one of those leaders where I generally think she's more of like a role filler. You're going to need a couple of really powerful units to take advantage of her front side action. I think a 0-8 is just a little bit too weak to deal with. Your opponent can just ignore hitting your base. They don't need to rush you down, especially if they're like a Leia deck, for example, where their leader comes down later and they can just, oh yeah, I'm just going to take a free hit into Satine because she has 0 power. And so their leader, you may heal up 4, 8 or so. If the format is a lot faster, maybe Satine has a little bit of a better place, but even then, if it is a lot faster, they may be able to just kill your Satine as soon as it deploys and then just keep on their merry way and keep killing off all your units and just kill your base. But to me, I don't see this format being like incredibly fast compared to some other ones that we've had. I think it's going to be kind of in the middle ground area, and I think Satine's going to suffer because of that. The 0-8 is just not going to do enough in this more, I'm going to, hit your units and kind of hit back and forth type of deal. Especially when you have units like spy tokens coming in, and spy tokens just get a free attack in Satine and it can't be killed by a unit. I mean, that's really nice. That is really, really nice. Between that and like another unit, you might be able to take out Satine, and that just is huge value, right? But that's going to wrap up our Vigilance. Let's move on to Command next. Alrighty, with the Command starting, we've got Colonel Yularen up first. Now, Colonel Yularen's quite interesting, as you will actually not have that many units on the board, but I could see a lot of spy tokens. So I do think you're going to be able to get this action off where you can attack with a unit, then attack with one that costs less. Generally, you're going to be hitting units back and forth. Your units are going to be trading a lot, so you're not going to have like a ton of units. But I do see there's going to be some spy tokens out there, some other units that are going to stick around. So I see some value out of this action. Being able to still use multiple actions in a single action is still very strong. I think one of the best things about Yularen is that he's a 5 to deploy 4/6, and that you will be able to attack with potentially 2 things at once when he is deployed. I think that's the strongest thing about him. A 4/6 stat line is actually really, really solid. It's something that you're really happy with in a lot of games. It comes down early enough so you can't get overwhelmed, and it's high enough stat to actually put on pressure on your opponent and not die immediately. That said, I don't think there's anything too amazing with him. He is a really good role filler, and I do think in Sealed specifically, you're going to find yourself just happy to have a leader that's a 4/6 and, going to be able to use his action. And that's kind of where I see him. He's like a mid to high B tier. Again, I think Lamassu could, go a little bit higher than him depending on the situation. Same thing to some degree with Chancellor Palpatine if you get a lot of plot cards in Sealed or so. But I think Yularen's going to be a really nice kind of role filler, and you're going to be perfectly happy playing this guy with some of your cards in here. As I need a command villainy leader. Yularen's going to fit that. Next up, we've got Dryden Voss. Now, Dryden Voss was one of my favorite leaders in Premier. I think he has a lot of potential, but his action, discard a card that costs 6 or more from your hand to then play a card that costs 5 or less and give it ambush, to me, is horrible and Sealed. For one, you get rid of cards very quickly, okay? And there is a very good chance that you will not be in a situation where you have cards to play. Not only that, but he's a 7 deploy leader, and the only thing he's doing on his flip side is discarding more cards to give your big units ambush. Now, there are situations where you can give your big units ambush and that be good, right? Don't get me wrong. But I don't think in most cases you're going to get a lot of value out of this. There are spots where you can ambush out some units, but I think in Sealed, what you're going to find is you're not going to have the right card combination to actually utilize his action all that well. You might be able to ambush a couple of times, get a little bit of value here and there, but it still costs you a card in hand. And when you're a 7 to deploy leader that also needs cards later to make or take advantage out of that leader, I mean, if you just compare that to Chancellor Palpatine, I mean, you're going to get dwarfed in card advantage at that point. And it's not like Limited is huge on card advantage, but when you're discarding that many cards to get your action going, I think Dryden's going to suffer a lot. I think this guy's kind of a C tier. It's really going to be tough to find the right deck where Dryden's going to be amazing in. It's going to be hard to find, okay, I've drawn my big units and the combination of really good small units that are actually good to ambush out, right? Because that's the key. You need the units that are actually worthwhile ambushing their units and not just ones that you kind of just want to play for whatever reason. And that's going to be the tricky part about this. Not to mention, like I said, a 7 deploy 5/7, while that's totally fine, it's not going to do anything else. Usually, because you're going to need multiple cards. And if you save all your cards until you flip Dryden, well, now you have a leader that basically did nothing until you got to the late game. And then if your opponent also has a late game leader, like let's say they're playing Leia, well, they've gotten a ton of experience on other units, outvaluing you the entire time. They're gonna have a massive board, and they're gonna deploy their leader a turn earlier, and then your ambush is not even gonna do anything, right? Because they have too big of units, or they have too many units on board. They're just gonna win the game. So I have a little bit of worries about Dryden. Next up, we've got Bail Organa. We've got another one that's kind of interesting, a pay 1 resource in Command Heroism, by the way. If a friendly unit was defeated this phase, you could return a friendly resource to its owner's hand, and you put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. So you kind of just replace the card on top of your deck with whatever card you resourced in the early game. So if you resource like a bomb, a really good rare or legendary that costs a lot, in the late game, you can kind of return it back to your hand. Now, we do have an action to discard 2 cards from your hand to flip Bail when you have 4 resources or more, and you get a 3/3. So I actually do like the fact that you can get a repeatable 3/3. I think that's a reasonably strong ability in Limited, but I don't think it's enough, especially with this. You're absolutely going to need more cards. That's the hard part. So yes, you can resource things. Yes, you can get a little bit of advantage at a plot. That's absolutely true, but it's sealed. You're not going to have a ton of plot cards to choose from. Like I said, in a good game with like similar to Palpatine, you're going to have like 4 or 5, right? That's going to be kind of the value there. And they need to be good ones in order for you to get value out of Bail, right? But yes, you could pay 1 resource to return the card to your hand for your resource pile, but then you're working on a resource deficit. And then you have also a 3/3, which isn't that great. I think this guy could get a little bit of value, but I think it's going to be difficult to actually get that value. It's really going to have to be a really nice combination of cards. Because also that, let's say you happen to resource the cards and you're discarding a couple. I mean, there's only so many actions that you can do this to where you're really going to start getting outvalued. And yes, I know you can draw 2 cards. You can continuously use Bail's action to deploy him. But the problem with that is you're always going to be a resource down if you're using Bail's action. So now you're working on a resource down basically for the rest of the game, and your payoff is a 3/3. It's going to be a little bit tricky. I can see this guy being, somewhat of like a C tier option. I think this is one where it's really difficult to evaluate. I've played a few limited games so far, and I've played around with, most of the leaders here. And with Bail, I have played a full three round Swiss with Bail, and it just kind of felt a little bit awkward every single time. Like it always felt like I was just getting not enough value for what I was trying to do. Doesn't mean you can't win, but I do think it's a little bit harder to play around. Next up, we've got Mon Mothma. So Mon Mothma is a 5 to deploy leader here in Command Heroism, and she has a really straightforward ability. She ignores the aspect penalties on non-official villainy official units you play. She's a 3/7 when she flips. Very tanky, solid stat line, happy about that. And then she gives each other friendly official unit +0/+1. I think she is solid. Actually, a little bit better than solid, especially in sealed when you're going to have a lot of officials that are out of aspect. You're going to get so many more options to play with Mon Mothma, making your deck way better. So I think that's actually a really nice value piece. In sealed specifically, this is going to be the highest value of the ignoring aspect penalties. Not only that, but a 5 to deploy 3/7 is very tanky. And the most important part is that she's giving all your other officials, which by the way is going to be very common in a set in the official category that also is sealed, right? So you're just going to be opening a bunch of officials. So I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of your units are officials when you're dropping them. And then giving that extra toughness allows you to make trades that you otherwise wouldn't. Like, let's say you attack a unit, your unit lives with 1 damage left on it, or 1 HP left. Well, suddenly you can use that unit to attack another unit to get that damage in, and that attack would never have been able to happen without Mon Mothma. I don't think she's like disgusting, but I do think she's a leader that I would index towards because it allows you to play more cards within your card pool and you get a good payoff for it. Mon Mothma seems like a very, very solid option to be able to slot in. With that said, we got to move on to the aggression, and there are some pretty interesting ones in the aggression category. So, first things first, we've got Daedra, our 4 to deploy leader alongside Bail. We've got a 1 resource action in aggression villainy to choose an enemy unit, its controller may deal 2 damage to it, or you draw a card. This is going to be pretty solid overall. I mean, 1 resource, like I said, similar to Leia, you're going to be able to use this in spots where you don't have the perfect curve. You just got to kind of a little bit of value here and there. Then we have a 4 to deploy 2/5, which it's not super exciting, but if you have more cards in hand than your opponent, it's going to get raid 2. This is a leader where if you do get cards like Unveiled Might, I keep mentioning this card, but I do think it's very, very strong in limited. You drop it on Daedra, you get a 4/8, and then you probably have more cards than your opponent because you've spent all your resources on a card that wasn't in your hand to begin with. Not only that, but your opponent's not going to probably want to have you dealing a bunch of damage to your units. 2/3s on turn 1 are not uncommon. And so now, if you play a 2/3 and your opponent plays a 2/3, and you've spent 1 resource to deal 2 damage to it, you get a value trade in that allows you to keep your unit, kill their unit, and you might even be able to play something else. If they allow you to draw a card, that's also going to be pretty solid because it's going to pump up your Daedra. I think this has a lot of dynamics that it's attacking on, and I think this could be one of the more aggressive leaders. I'm very curious to see how this plays out. The only question I have is if it's a little bit of a slower format, the stat line on Daedra can come back to bite you. That said, if you do get a couple of those upgrades, like I mentioned earlier, with like Lamassu, that can go ahead and pump Daedra because you're going so early in the game, that can be huge. That can be very, very big for your game plan. I think this is one of those ones that I'm going to slot in A tier. It's hard for me to put it higher than this. The reason for that is, Mon Mothma and Jabba in the A tier or Leia, they just work so well with any units that you're getting. Any combination of cards, for the most part, are just going to be really, really solid because they have such versatility with them. Whereas Daedra, the value is pretty straightforward, which is nice, right? But the leader side can be a little bit hit or miss depending on the cards you get. So I think she's really, really powerful, but I do think that she's going to have that one downside. Depending on the matchup, it can be a little bit weaker. Next up, we've got Governor Price. This one is also aggression villainy. We've got a action to pay 1 to ready a token unit. Now in limited, this is generally just going to be those spy tokens. You're pretty much never going to really get anything else outside of that. There might be situations where you can put upgrades on your spy tokens, but it's not going to be as common as in other formats. You're not going to have that many upgrades to really utilize. Because you're really going to want to put them on your leader, especially since they're usually overcosted in this format. That said, I think there's a little bit of value you can gain from the 1 resource action from Price. And then we have a 6 to deploy 4/6 that gets +1/+0 for each ready friendly token unit. There's going to be, like I said, spy tokens running around very commonly. It's not unlikely to have her be a 5/6 or 6/6 when she deploys, especially if you're in that kind of game plan. And then on attack, you create spy tokens. So that could be kind of interesting as well. I think she's more fitting towards a more aggro style where, you don't necessarily need your leader to maintain control of the game or bring it back, but a leader that kind of comes down, gets a little bit of damage, maybe a little bit of annoying additional threats, and then your opponent has to deal with the leader, your threats, and the new ones you're just popping up in order for them to win. So I think Price is going to kind of go that direction. I'm not a huge fan of Governor Price, to be honest. A 6 to deploy 4/6 is definitely on the weaker side. Again, if you're looking at like you, Lauren, that's a turn earlier for the same stat line, which is a little bit unfortunate. I don't think your leader ability is going to be like super relevant. I think it's going to be a little bit of value, but again, you need to have those proper setups in place. The spy token's going to be pretty nice. To me, she's like a B tier. I'm going to leave her in B tier. I am debating whether or not to put her above like Palpatine or Lamassu or leave her in the low B tier. I'm going to leave her towards the low B tier. I don't think the spy token on attack is going to be enough to push her a little bit higher for me. I think that's the best thing that Price is actually getting is that spy token that comes in on attack every single turn. That could be a little bit interesting, but we'll have to see. Next up, we've got a very, very unique leader in Cassian Andor. This makes it so that friendly units cannot be attacked if they've damaged an opponent's base. This is obnoxious in limited, completely obnoxious. This means that you can probably beeline for your opponent's base in a lot of games and just win because your opponent cannot interact with those units. And it's not that difficult, right? Because on turn 1, let's say you play a unit. Turn 2, even if you don't have the initiative, they can attack your unit, but you attack base, fine. Their unit isn't normally able to kill your unit. You need another unit that's a higher cost to kill your unit. Generally, in limited, that's how that kind of works. Unless you get a nice curve, right? And so what's going to happen is you can play a unit. Let's say you do have the initiative. You attack. They can't attack your unit. You play your big unit. Okay, cool. Your opponent's going to attack base. Well, now, the next turn, you attack with your small unit into their base. And then you attack with your big unit into the base. Because they can't kill the big unit, most likely without 2 actions, right? So there's going to be kind of things that you can do with that. And if you build your game plan very focused towards that aggressive strategy, I think you could do some good work. The only problem with that is that you're also setting yourself up for your opponent to just race you. But if you're in that mindset, you generally can build a deck with the cards that you have available to take advantage out of Cassian. I don't think it's going to be one of those leaders where you're going to want to like, okay, this is a leader that's going to provide me so much value, I want to go towards him. He does have a 6-2 flip side with Overwhelm, which can be nice. And if you are able to keep initiative, this guy can do some good work. The problem is that in some cases, even if your opponent doesn't spend the 6 resources, but if they just, let's say you attack one of their small units and you're like, oh, I'm just going to claim initiative and keep my Cassian alive. Because it's limited, there might be spots where they can claim initiative with 6 resources open, and that's the good play. Like, that is a good play for them, and kills your Cassian, right? And then you have a leader that doesn't do a crazy amount, especially since they have the initiative now, which they can kill off your units. This is one of those ones where I'm going to put him in B tier, not because he's not powerful, but because he is not a leader where I have a mix of cards, and I'm going to play Cassian because he's going to really boost those cards up. This is one of those leaders where I have these cards that really want an aggro play style. I'm going to put Cassian in. That's where Cassian fits. I don't really see this guy really providing additional value for everything else. So it is one of those cards where it's really a role filler based on your card pool, but it's a really good match to that card pool. Next up, we've got Luthen. This one is another aggression heroism leader. We've got when a friendly unit is defeated while attacking, you may exhaust leader, deal 1 damage to unit or base. Then we have a 5 to deploy 2/7, and well, same ability, but instead deals 2 damage to unit or base. This guy seems awesome in limited. Very, very strong. One of the reasons why I think he's going to be very, very strong is there's a lot of unit combat in limited, and there's a lot of units that your units are going to be dying, and you get just that little bit of extra value every single time that happens. 2 damage to a friendly unit or base can really put on the pressure to your opponent. A 2/7 is not that easy to deal with, and so you can just constantly keep attacking. You can trade up with units, which is really important. Like if you have a 2/3 and they play a 3/3, suddenly you attack into their 3/3, and then you get to trade right then and there, and that's going to put a huge damper on your opponent's game plan. And you can kind of do that across the board, right? Suddenly you have a 2/3 or a 3/3 and it lived with 1 damage or 1 HP left on it, and your opponent plays, I don't know, a 4 toughness unit. Well, you could suddenly attack that unit, have your unit get killed, but then kill that other unit. Like, you could do some really, really obnoxious things with this guy. I think this guy's going to give you a lot of value. I am tempted to put this guy in the S tier. This is one of those ones where, yeah, I'm just going to play this guy because I've got units and they're going to die when they're trading in combat, and then I can get more damage to your base, or I can get more damage to your other units, and it's going to be pretty good there. I think this guy's going to get a lot of value across the board. I do think it depends a little bit on the units you get, right? But I think he's like high A tier, low S tier, and I'll put him in low S tier just because I do think he's a little bit better than Jabba. So, I'll put him in S tier for the current moment. That's going to wrap up our aggression. Let's move on to Cunning. Starting us off in Cunning, we've got Sly Moore. We've got a Cunning villainy leader with an action to pay 1. If there are 4 more exhausted units in play, you get to create a spy token. This action is actually not that terrible in limited. It's not amazing because you will obviously need the 4 resources. You can create a spy token, but you need 4 exhausted units. Usually on like turn 2 or 3, there is a chance that you may be able to use this action to create a singular spy token. So that's not going to be all that bad. So I do like that for Sly Moore. But she has a 5 to deploy 3/6 that says on attack, you may deal 2 damage to an exhausted unit. So her front side action can give you a little bit of value because you can create those spy tokens, not too uncommonly. Her flip side is going to give you a little bit of value by dealing some damage to some exhausted units, which is, again, not that uncommon to have. But she has a 3/6, which is a really, really mediocre stat line. I think the action and the on attack trigger makes up for her bad stat line. The 2 damage to an exhausted unit is actually a solid on attack ability. The problem is that she's a 3/6, which means she's super susceptible to just die to everything, across a couple of attacks. If you could pump her up with some upgrades, I think that could be a little bit more interesting. If you have some ways to exhaust units, that could be a little bit more interesting, but it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to do that in sealed. I think she's going to be like a solid C tier option where you can get a little bit of extra spy tokens, and then that can help you set up for future spy tokens, and then you can get that on attack to maybe finish off their spy tokens because they're going to be exhausted, or finish off whatever unit they have with that 2 damage. So that's going to be pretty nice. So I think she's going to be C tier. I'm tempted to swap Price and Sly more, to be honest. But maybe she's like a low B tier. You know what? I'll keep her in low B. I do think she has a little bit more value than some of these C tier options, but I don't think it's by much. Next up, we've got C3PO. Oh, guys, C3PO. We've got a Cunning Heroism leader with an action to pay 1 resource. If you control an exhausted unit, you get to exhaust an enemy unit, or any unit for that matter. We've got a 4 to deploy leader. 1/6. On attack, if you control another exhausted unit, you may exhaust a unit. Very annoying, I suppose, but he's a 1/6 that provides no additional value. Exhausting units for 1 resource is not what you want to be doing in limited in most cases, unless you have a hyper aggressive deck, and you don't with C3PO because he's a 1/6 leader. If this was like a 3/6 or something like that, maybe, because you could actually get in damage and then prevent your opponent from attacking constantly. This guy's an absolute D tier. Like, this guy is horrible. I don't see anyone getting any value out of this in limited. Again, you can stall out your opponent, but guess what? They're not worried. Oh, sure. Go ahead and exhaust my unit. Spend your resources to do that, my friend. No big deal. And it's not even like something you could pay 1 to exhaust any unit at any time. You need to make an action first, which means they're going to have the opportunity to attack you anyways with whatever unit they have. So they're always going to get that option, which is really, really bad in a deck that's trying to exhaust your units. C3PO, his front side action is bad. His unit stat is bad. His flip side on attack trigger is bad. He is a D tier. Just absolutely and utterly a D tier. Next up, we've got Padme. So Padme is kind of interesting. We've got a Cunning Heroism leader that says whenever we reveal or discard a card, we may exhaust later, deal 1 damage to something. So this is not going to be super uncommon in sealed because you're going to have a lot of reveal cards or disclosing cards in the draft packs. There's also a lot of cards like Bail Organa, which happen to discard cards, or Chopper or whatever. Now, Chopper is a legendary, I believe. So, you know, that's not something that you're really going to get after all that often. But like something like a Bail Organa, or, you know, cards that are going to, you know, let's say you're playing aggression, you have some cards that, you know, reveal some aggression cards, deal some damage to stuff. I think you're going to get a reasonable amount of actions from her front side ability. She does flip as a 6 resource 3/8, has the same ability, but, you know, you can do it basically any amount of times in a single turn. I don't think she's incredibly powerful. One of the best things about Padme in the format, in Premier format, that I'm really excited about Padme for is Tarkin Town. You don't get access to Tarkin Town, which is a little bit unfortunate. But then also, most of the time, we're not triggering Padme from the disclose portion. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to, because again, it is a Secrets of Power limited format. So you're going to open cards that will have a lot of disclose. But a lot of disclose cards aren't that strong. So you need to get the right combination of cards to really get a lot of value. Usually what we're doing is like R2-D2 from set 3, lets you discard a card when it comes in. Poe Dameron, which can attack and discard a card, or Marin that can discard a card at will. It's actually the discard a card portion, not the reveal a card portion. That's really, really powerful. And there's not a crazy amount of discard a card. And even if you are discarding a card, well, you usually don't have the deck makeup to be able to replace the value that you gain from discarding that card because you're missing out on cards. So to me, she's like a B tier option. I think she fits somewhere on the low end of B tier. You know, getting that 1 damage isn't going to be that incredible, but I do think she can get a little bit of value in there. I think Chancellor Palpatine and Padme actually are very similar power level in these games. It really depends on kind of what you're able to pick up for the sealed format, but it's totally a reasonable card to slot in just to get a little bit of extra damage. That 1 damage can matter in some matchups for sure. Next up, we've got Sabe. This one's actually pretty exciting, guys. So Sabe, we've got a Cunning Heroism leader. When a friendly unit deals combat damage to base, you may exhaust the leader. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of the defending player's deck, and you can discard one of those cards. In Premier, you have multiple copies of cards. You have a big deck. You have a lot of cards that are really good, right? In Limited or Sealed specifically, you may have a couple of cards in the deck that are really powerful, and Sabe can preemptively get rid of those cards. Not only that, but your deck size is 30. There are not an abnormal amount of games where you're dealing a couple of hits to your opponent, the game goes really long, maybe you got a little bit to restore, and you've discarded 4, 5, or 6 cards off the top of their deck, and that's the difference maker. There are a lot of limited games that I've had that comes down to those last few cards that you're drawing. But I really like the fact that you can really mess with your opponent's top cards of your deck. In Limited, that matters a lot more. We have a 5 to flip, 3/6. A little bit disappointed in that. Same reasons for Sly Moore, but she's got raid 1, which means he gets a 4-powered attacker. And you're really going to be aggressive because you want to be hitting their base to get Sabe's front side to be working. And then also on the flip side, you can discard a card from their hand to make them, or rather look at their hand, discard a card, and then they draw a new card. So again, shrinking their deck size, which again, in limited is relevant because the decks are so small and you also are able to kind of grind out your opponent. But then more importantly, you can pull their most important cards out of their hand, which again, like I said, in Premiere, there's so many good cards. Even if you pull one good card, they can easily replace it with another card off the top of their deck, and it's going to be of similar power level. In limited, there may only be 3 to 4 cards that are truly difference makers for you. You know, maybe you take out their Thrawn that they happen to open up, or maybe you take out their Cad Bane that comes down and defeats a unit, or maybe you take out whatever other, you know, very powerful rare or legendary they happen to have. And again, there are a lot of cards, or a lot of decks that really cannot come back from something of that nature. You know, your opponent's sitting on like a Bo-Katan or like a Captain Rex that they open, the 7/7 Sentinel, and they're holding on to it because it's a 6-drop 7/7 Sentinel. It's amazing. I love that card. Fantastic. Yoink. Gone. She's 5 to deploy. Rex is 6 resources to play. You're not going to be able to play that. Bo-Katan, 9 resources. Maybe you're saving it. Maybe it's Bomb that you're going to be playing a little bit later. Gone. Discarded into the discard pile. See you later. No need to have that anymore. Or maybe they have like a Daedra unit, right? That's going to come out and ambush. Well, gone. Don't need that anymore, right? It's all those types of cards. Those really, really big powerhouses, the rares and the legendaries that are supposed to be the good cards in your deck that you can get rid of with Sabe, that I think is going to be really, really powerful. I think she is going to be like a solid A tier. I think this is one where her abilities in limited are incredibly powerful. And again, you could play any units with her. Yes, you want to be a little bit more aggressive because you want to be hitting their base. You want to put them on the defensive so that you have to attack your units. So that can be a little bit tricky, but you're in Cunning Heroism, so that archetype usually reinforces that. I think Sabe is going to be really interesting. I'm excited to play with Sabe a little bit more in limited. I've already done a little bit of games with her, and might I say, out of any leaders on here, the most annoying leader, and sometimes in limited or Premiere, this is also the case, is Sabe. I mean, when you see them attack, you're just dreading like, oh no, please don't hit my awesome ambusher. Please don't hit my amazing rare legendary. I just want to play with good cards. And then you draw into a bunch of comments, and they're like, okay, but they took the best card. Oh, it feels horrible, absolutely horrible. And then lastly, we've got DJ, and I'm going to be honest, guys, we're just going to slot him immediately into D tier. I think the biggest thing with DJ is, yes, you could do the whole capture thing. Yes, you could do the whole nice value from when played effects. He does not have a secondary aspect. Yes, double cutting, sure. That is something. Yes, you could play aggression or vigilance, and that's a secondary aspect, I guess. There are so many heroism or vigilance cards you will be missing out on if you do not play a heroism or villainy leader, not vigilance, heroism or villainy leader. You need oftentimes those cards to make a truly powerful deck. You're going to miss out on so much of the card pool when you open your packs when you have a leader that cannot play heroism or villainy cards. And I guess you can, yes, but it's not like you're getting a ton of value from DJ's ability, right? You're not able to really utilize the amazing cards like Pirated Starfighter or Libertine that you have in Premiere. This is much more of a like, I need to set up a deck and then my deck actually functions. You cannot set up your deck in sealed. You're just going to get whatever you get, and then hopefully it works. And guess what? With DJ, it just limits your options. Do I think he's better than C3PO? I'm going to give the edge to C3 to DJ. He's still a 4/6 on 6, which I actually just prefer over the 1/6 C3PO. And there might be some cool things you can do with his action. Yes, it does still give you a discount. Yes, you can still trigger when played effects. There's no like double cunning options that I'm really truly excited about to even pick up anyways, which is again the reason why I mentioned my DJ is a little bit weak here. I mean, if you're looking at the card pool, I'm like taking a look here, and I'm trying to think, because I don't even see really any option. Is there any double cunning cards that you have in the new form? I don't think there's a single one, to be honest. I don't remember actually if there were any double cutting cards, but regardless, it is very, very few and far between. And even if so, there are all the double cutting cards that you're trying to play, besides Libertine. Libertine was one of the cards that is double cutting, but that is going to be very, very, very rare to be able to pick up here, seeing as it's a rare. So besides like Libertine here, there's not really any double cutting cards that you want from the new format. The Cantina Bouncers, the Cunnings, the Bodies, those came from all previous sets. Those are the when played abilities that are really strong, and you can't really do that with DJ in the sealed set. So gonna be a D tier, and that's gonna wrap up our list. Very, very different from the premier list for sure. I think there's a lot of leaders in here that you can really make an argument towards, a little bit down, a little bit below. Honestly, this is a very interesting smattering of leaders. Like if you look at the previous sets, a lot of them just kind of did very straightforward things. This is one of the first sets where I'm like, dang, a lot of these leaders are extremely unique. Take, for example, Cassian. That is an incredibly unique ability. Bale, another one that's incredibly, incredibly unique. Satine, 0 power. That's an incredibly unique leader, right? We have a lot of leaders that do weird things. Now, weird things aren't necessarily good in sealed. You kind of want stock standard, and that's why Leia, Luthen, just units that give you value for doing what you already want to do in sealed are what you want to have. And that's exactly what the S tiers do. I'm curious to hear what all your thoughts are. If any of you have also played any limited so far. I've only gotten a few games in just because there's not many people that are able to play right now, or a few like limited pools in. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think about a lot of these different leaders. And the ones that I'm most curious about to see how they play out are like Sabe. I've already played a little bit with her, but I could always use more experience. Mon Mothma, how many cards are in there? Cassian's also a very interesting one to me. And Bale, even though he's in the seat here, I'm curious to see if anyone's going to really be able to pop out with this guy and really feel the strength of Bale Organa. Thanks so much, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed, and good luck in your pre-release. I'll have another video on that very shortly. See you then.